to be rendered and cache that data rather than immediately making draw calls. Why? A single sentence is fine.
Two threads.
Okay, so there are two threads, so we don't want to do it right away because two threads going on at the same time. So anything like that's good. Anybody say anything else you want to make sure is good? Question 2, why do we use reference counting in our class? When do reference counts need to be incremented and when do reference counts need to be decremented? You can answer generally, but you should also say when the game needs to increment, decrement, and when graphics needs to increment, decrement. Why do we use reference counting in our class?
We don't want to, like, the object should not be deleted when the other thread is using it.
Okay, good. What's another way of saying that? Did anybody say it a different way? Ensure the what? Okay, good. Any other way?
Exclusion.
Keep the storage safe from the coin operation.
One more time?
Keep the storage safe from the coin operation.
Okay, yes, I'm still looking for another. These are all correct. I'm looking for sort of a C++y or. Yes, that's the same idea. So I'm looking for maybe shared ownership or not ownership or something like that. So, but anything you said like that is good. So we use reference counting because you have threads that are sharing ownership, or two threads are accessing objects at the same time. When do reference counts need to be incremented?
When you create an object.
When you create an
When you
object.
point.
Okay, when you create an object, that's true. If they put down the quiz, don't take away points, but that's not really a very good answer because yes. So what else?
Initialize.
No, that's wrong. It should be on creation or a factory function. But when
somebody sticks a claim, when they try to use the object.
yes, and so in terms of programming, when would that be? And as a programmer, when do you know? Maybe not just in our class, or you can say in our class, but when do you have to increment a reference count if you're using reference counting?
You have to use that object to do something. If you have to use that object to do something, you're taking some pointing to that object and incrementing it to front top so that it has to get executed.
That second part was better. It's still not the entire answer I want, but it's true. I think you're thinking the right thing, but you haven't said what I'm looking for. But at first you said when you have to use it, and I was thinking, well, not really. But then you said if you're taking a pointer, and I was thinking, okay, that's a bit closer. And what else did you say?
You increment the reference count because you don't want it to get deleted.
And why might it get deleted?
Because maybe other objects are using it and the reference count goes to 0 and it gets deleted by itself.
Okay, this is all true, but I'm looking for maybe a way of saying is when can you know for sure that you don't need to increment it?
When you start writing the data.
In our class, that's true. But so let's talk about in our class. In our class, when do you need to do it in this assignment?
So when I'm drawing the geometry object in the graphics class, I increment the geometry object reference.
When you're drawing it?
Yeah.
When you're passing it into graphics.
When it's being put in the bucket, when you're caching it as part of the which function?
Submit.
Okay, good. So in our class, that's when you need to do it. And why does it need to be part of the submit function? You kind of answered, because if you don't do it, then
It might get deleted.
somewhere else. Okay, so more generally, not just in our class, not even just in games, just programming, talking if you're using a reference counting scheme. And the same thing kind of applies for smart pointers too. When do you need to increment the reference count?
When you are submitting the data or caching the data.
Okay, that's still our class. What about in general?
When you obtain the reference to the object.
When you're doing what to it?
When you get the reference of holding the pointer to the object.
That's what I was looking for. If you're taking an object and you're going to store that pointer, then you need to increment the reference count. And there are a bunch of different variations on this idea. We talked about one, putting it in the bucket. And the reason we do this assignment and talk about it is because it's a really good example. So I don't mean to say like this is a bad example. This is a great example. But there are other examples too. And basically the idea is if there's going to be some kind of shared ownership, if you're going to take a pointer and hold on to it, you need to make sure that pointer is going to be valid. And usually if you're using reference counting, that's when you need to increment the reference count. going to store this. And so even though the function's returning, I'm going to hold on to this pointer, and that means the pointer better still be valid when I use it later, right? If I'm storing that pointer. Does that make sense? The flip side that I was kind of asking about would be, when do you not need to increment reference count? You say if you're going to use something. Even in our class, you could use an effect or an object without incrementing the reference count. How could you do that? If in what circumstances? We're actually doing it. Can you think of when you're using these and not incrementing the reference count? If you already have it in the bucket, you've already incremented the reference count. And when you're using it, when you're drawing with it, you don't increment the reference count and then draw and decrement. Right? There's no need to, because you already own a reference. So what you were saying is right, and you were probably thinking the right thing, but it's important when we think more generally, not just doing this special assignment and then we're done and never after thinking about it, but when we're thinking about your programming career in the future, then we think, okay, we have shared ownership. I need to increment the reference count if I'm going to stake a claim for that shared ownership. And the reason I might have to do that is if I'm going to somehow try and use this object after the other thread might change it. Right? So there are a few different situations this can happen. There's not really a pattern you can always think about, but generally there's going to be some kind of function where you get access to that pointer in the first place. That function will be called, right? You'll be past the pointer, and you can be reasonably sure that when that happens, the pointer is going to be valid. Just like it is in our class. Does that make sense? Because someone is telling you, someone is saying, look, here's a pointer. So as long as you're in that situation, you can do whatever you want with it. But if you're ever going to exit that situation and still want to use that object, that's an increment. And then after all that discussion, when does it need to be decremented?
After being used.
Yes, when we're done with it. And if we've incremented it, then we need a matching decrement when we're done. Good. Any other questions about the
Also, while cleaning up, like when you exit the, like when you're exiting, cleaning up everything, you also need to decrement it because it needs to calculate all the structure. You need to do it once because when you create one, it automatically increments the count.
Yes, but the usage pattern is the same. You're done with it, and so you decrement. So maybe another way to think about that is when you call load, we haven't talked about, we were calling, no, that's this assignment today. We haven't called load, right? We're calling create or some factory function. Let's talk about what we'll do today, though. Maybe, good. Introduction to what we're talking about today. Generally, when you load an asset, you don't know if it's already been loaded or not. So it's a little bit hidden right now because we're calling create, and so we know that it doesn't exist already. And maybe this is more obvious to me because I've done this class a bunch and I know where we're headed. As I'm talking out loud, I think, oh yeah, we haven't really talked about loading it. But when you load an object, you say, hey, system, hey, graphics, for example, load dinosaur shape. And it will give you back a pointer. And the reference count to that pointer will be what? Trick question.
It should be one.
It will be at least one. But we don't know what it is. Why not? It might be more. How could it be more?
It might be says multiple locations.
Other people might have loaded it already. And so when we call load, the system says, oh, I've already loaded this. I'll just make a new reference and pass it back to this person. And we don't know. So it's true that create is a way of setting that reference count to 1, or your factory function. But in general, as a user of this, you don't actually call the factory function directly. You call something that says, hey, give me something, and it might allocate a new one, the reference count might be 1, or it might say, oh, I already have one of these. Increment the reference count, and it might be more than 1. All we know is that if it gives it to us when we call this sort of function like give me this, then if it's giving you something, that reference count must be 1. Or, I just made the same mistake. A reference count, they've given me a reference. I own a reference. That's a better way of thinking about it. If there's some kind of function that gives me something that's reference counted, if it's designed properly, then that reference has already been incremented when it returns to me. How do I know that? Based on something I just said. Why not give me something that the reference count hasn't been incremented, and then it's my responsibility to increment it? Why would that be a bad design? Not just bad, but not just less than ideal, but a flawed design. Why can't it work that way?
Because you don't know whether someone else has loaded it or not.
Well, no. I thought you were going to say the right answer. You don't know whether someone else has done something, but not loaded. You don't know whether it is still.
Reference counted, like someone is using that object.
When is it okay? When is it okay to? When is it safe to do an increment? When you know that it's still valid. In our class, it has to be during the submit function, because as soon as that function leaves, the other thread might do something. So let's get back to my question again. If you call a function like a create function or a load function or some kind of factory function, and it returns an object to you, how do I know that it must have already incremented the reference count? Why would it be a bad design for it to say, here's something, if you want, you can increment the reference count for ownership, but you don't have to if you don't want to?
Because like it's possible for someone to choose to not increment the reference count, at which point you don't even know whether the object is actually valid.
So that's not true. We can assume that it returns a valid value. If not, that really would be a bad function. But let's assume that it returns a valid value. And if I decide not to do anything with that, if I just say I'm just going to ignore this, I'm not going to put a stake in it, that would actually be okay. There's a different problem I'm thinking of.
Well, there's also like if they are giving us an object reference counted for us, we have an interest in this. Before we use it, it might already get deleted and replaced by some other.
Yes, is that what you're trying to say? The danger is that it can be decremented because that function's returned. So when the function returns to us, it says this is a valid object, but if they haven't done this, sorry, if they haven't done this for you, then other stuff can happen in that thread, and it could be decremented, and it could go away, and then you don't even have a chance to put it in because you don't know that it's valid anymore. So again, we're not talking about this class, we're talking in a general sense. If there's some kind of way of acquiring this object, if you say load this, or create this, or give it to me, that function has to increment that reference count for it to be correct, because when it gives it to you, and by gives it to you, I mean the function returns, then who knows what's happening in other threads. So if you want to get something and then say, I don't want it anymore, you have to assume that it has the reference count, and then you can decrement it. In the case of a smart pointer, a lot of you are interested in smart pointers, which is good. Then this would happen automatically, right? But it's the same principle. A smart pointer, when it returns to you, must have a reference count of the thing. And then if you don't want it anymore, it will just go out of scope and that reference count go away. Does that make sense? Any questions? Any other thing people want to say about question 2 that you want to make sure you get full points we haven't talked about? Everybody got it? Okay. Oh, I have another question 1, 2, and 2. It's like there's so many mistakes this year. I don't know. I'm getting old and tired, I guess. Okay, the second question 2, question 3. In our class, the simulation is updated at a lower frequency than the game is rendered at. Give a brief, high-level description, a single sentence is fine, of what must be done to make a simulation object appear to move smoothly each rendered frame, even when it isn't actually changing position in the simulation.
So calling instead of changing the position, you change the velocity, and then we make sure to throw update increasing the budget value.
Extrapolation.
Yeah, extrapolation. Yeah.
So that was great, anything like that is good. What I was really looking for is you have to do extrapolation or predict about the time that's passed that you haven't simulated. Does anybody want to discuss that or say, what if I put this? I have some notes, but since we ran out of time so badly last time, I don't think there's anything critical in my notes. So let's do questions first. And then we'll see how we do with time. What questions do people have about it? Maybe I should put the assignment up. Just any questions?
It's also like, should we put the position of the object in?
Wait, hold that thought. I didn't want to like distract during the quiz and get this set up, and now apparently it's not working, so my plan was less than ideal. No, my plan was so ideal. Okay, I'm sorry. Ask Ian, yes?
It's also like, I'm thinking it is better for us to store the location in an individual position instead of just put it together with camera and with object. And the question is, should we reference count the location? Or should we consider the location as kind of an asset that is shared by multiple systems, or that is just a bunch of value that we can combine and process for?
So I didn't understand fully, so let's talk through and see if I get what you're asking. So you're caching in your bucket position,
Yeah.
and you're saying that you want to store it separately from the object. Did I understand that?
Yeah.
Why do you want to store it separately from the object?
For the same position information might be used by other system.
So you're saying, what if there are 3 different things to be rendered all in the same position?
No. It's also like, only if there is another system other than graphics, other than the game, then only care about the position instead of other information like string facts or other things about the object.
So it's not graphics, it's physics. Say.
Okay.
And physics wants to store that too.
Yeah.
And we say, well, if we have a copy in the graphics bucket and a copy in the physics bucket, then we're wasting memory. Instead, we could reference count it and just put it there.
No, it's also like we have an object that is called user object.
Yeah.
And we have something added that is a location. I'm saying we should separate those two together.
Yes, but I don't understand why.
Uh,
You said if there's another system, they might want it also, but I don't understand
it's
why they
also
would.
like, it's also like when I submit those things, I just put everything inside the user object and that is kind of the graph those things together. But I somehow the position stored separately. It's also like the user object for the reference to the position instead of having it as part of it.
And I don't understand why you want to store it separately, so it's hard for me to answer the question. Is it to save memory?
No, it's also like, I mean, what if there is another system suppose that it also wants to know the position, but they don't care about the other information such as the size of the render object?
So what if they do? But I'll answer that in a minute, but you're saying, so it is to save memory then.
It's
So-
not a system.
So you don't care that both graphics and physics store this position. Okay, I don't understand, but I'll try to answer it and then I'll say why you shouldn't do that. You could reference count it, that would work, but that's bad, it wastes a lot of memory. These matrices, how many are there?
3 for each thing you render, right? There's like the MVP formula.
You're thinking of graphics?
Yeah, I mean, to get to render one object, I have to do 3 transforms.
You're not talking about that though, you're talking about the
Oh.
world orientation, right? The world transform, the local to world transform. That's what you're talking about. Yes?
Well, it is not because I'm storing the physics as rich value
the bucket, that's what you're storing?
No, not in the bucket, in the game.
Aren't we talking about buckets and graphics or not?
Not really.
Then I guess I don't understand your question at all.
Okay.
You're talking about the game object in the game, not graphics.
Yes.
Then yes, you could store it any way you want. The rigid body object.
Okay.
You're saying yes, if you have a game object, you can have it
Yeah.
you can do whatever you want in the game.
Yeah, the question is, should we reference count the rich body of object?
Why would you want to?
Because it is still kind of an asset that might be shared by other people.
If you want to share it between two different things, then yes, you should reference count. Right? You have to, if it's shared ownership. Or you could use a smart pointer or one of the C++ fancy pointers if you wanted. But yes, if you're going to do that, if two different things are going to access and own this shared memory separately, then you should do that.
Okay. But I mean, if you are passing the asset by value, you don't need to know.
You don't need to. I don't know any reason why you would want to. So
Okay.
yeah, I feel like I'm not understanding your question. But the answer is, if you want to share it between things, you should do a reference count. But now you're saying, well, what if I don't want to share it? Then yes, don't share it, and then you don't need to do a reference count. Okay, sorry, I did poorly on answering that. Next one, other questions. I'll do better, I'm sure. Yes?
Do you have any the mouse tracking for our application?
Do I?
Do our project?
No, I haven't. You could use mouse buttons with that user input function, but there's nothing that looks at mouse position. People have done that in past years. It's not a bad project for your system project, but other people have just wanted it and put it in independently of that. So it's not that hard to do, but I don't have anything like that. Other questions? If you decide to do it, please make it platform independent. Make a nice platform independent interface for it. Other questions?
For the camera, I was actually just curious what I'm just very ignorant of the cameras. I just looked at the aspect ratio and the depth of field kind of plans, what kind of level of control in the rendering.
Okay. So the aspect ratio is fully determined. There's not really any wiggle room there. But the aspect ratio is width divided by height. So based on the size of your window, the aspect ratio should be calculated automatically. Good so far?
Yeah.
We haven't talked about how to change the size of your window. So you probably all have the size that I've given you, but you should still calculate it using width divided by height, and you should have that information available. Okay, so also in graphics then, in the camera, there is the near plane and the far plane distance. This is a graphics thing. It doesn't really matter for our class, but you asked, so I'll try to give you a short answer. So the way that the math works is you need kind of a distance that anything closer than that distance won't be rendered, and anything further than this other distance won't be rendered. So you put kind of the bounds on. You'll only render things between that distance and that distance. That is a consequence of the way that rasterizers work. In ray tracing, you don't have that same constraint. But for our class, you need to do it in order to make this matrix. In general, you want the near plane to be as far away as possible, and the far plane to be as near as possible, because that will give you the most precision. You want this to be as small a range as possible. In our class, none of that will matter at all. You make a big world. Some people have tried to do that, like someone did a terrain generator last year, but for most of you, you're just gonna have a small little thing, so I would just keep it at the values I have and not.
Yeah, so do you want to have to assign with just like hard code those in or just okay.
And then the other, do you want me to keep going, or if I just say you can use what I gave you and that's good, is that good enough, or do you want
Oh
me to
yeah,
keep
I
going?
was curious like I didn't know able to use the original height, so that's good to know.
That's good. The field of view,
Oh, yeah,
if you've played PC games, you might be a little bit familiar with that, but that, you can think of it as the angle that you can see, kind of like that. And so a smaller field of view will look like that, and a wider field of view will look like that. It also, you can think of it if you know movies or cameras. You can think of the different fields of views in lenses. But in general, a wide field of view will seem more distorted, and a narrow field of view will seem, what is it like? If you imagine the same size window, let's say that this is a window. If I get further and further away, what's happening in my field of view?
It's wider.
The object becomes smaller and smaller.
We're not talking about the object, we're talking about the angle that I can see through it.
You can see.
Oh,
Yeah.
small, yeah, small.
Can you picture that now?
Yeah, okay.
So, and now as I get closer, the field of view is going to become,
Okay.
until I get up close, and my eyes don't have that big a field of view, but now I have a big field of view, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit hard to visualize, especially if you haven't thought about this with movies or games before, but that's what that FOV will do. Your monitor is like a window where the camera is, and so a wider field of view will let you see more stuff. It's like a fisheye lens, and a narrow field of view. Is that
Yeah.
enough?
So yeah, just the terminology.
Yeah.
Cool.
You can just use the defaults I gave you for the rest of this class, and it will be fine.
Sweet.
Good. Other questions? Oh, there's so few questions compared to last week. Probably because we didn't skip a week. Any more? Got anything? I see a lot of people looking at their screens.
Oh,
What does this mean? What are you working on that? If I watch back, is it going to be League of Legends? Yes?
Oh, so actually, I think someone actually asked it on Canvas, but it was like for like those like extrapolate functions that have like the seconds to go like to whatever the field is called, but like so I tried to do the same thing where I put 0 to for most of those, but like should we be passing in like a time elapsed?
Who can answer that question? You can answer that question.
Oh, just what the answer to your question was. Yeah, I was just curious if that answer.
My question is that should I consider have a counter?
Yes.
My question is because I use on update function. There are two
Oh,
update
okay, I didn't know. Oh,
I
okay.
use update based on the timeline update solution.
Oh, yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
It does, for sure?
Yeah, no, okay.
For sure, for sure?
Because I had one where I was using that field, and the other ones I wasn't, so I just moved them to the other function. So okay.
Okay. That didn't seem to answer the question I thought you were asking, but you seem happy with it, so if you're happy, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Any other questions about anything? Okay. Well, let me go over some of my notes and we can talk about stuff and then we can move on to the next assignment. First of all, I'm way behind. I still haven't graded anything but assignment 1, so bad teacher, sorry. But I have kind of been paying attention to what Sid has been saying, and it seems like still a bunch of people lost points on assignment 5. Wait, no, that's what we're doing today. On assignment 4, for not having things work when the assets aren't there. So that's a lot of points to lose, and I want to make, I talked about it last week, and I thought maybe after assignment 3, and we talked about it, nobody would do that, but then in assignment 4, a lot of people lost points. So, do people understand what SID is doing and how you can check for that?
Did we submit the assignment already when you made that comment then?
You may have, but you still had until 9 a.m. the next morning, I think. Right? But you maybe did.
No, for assignment 3.
Yeah, for assignment 3, my point is on assignment 4, a lot of people had it, so I thought, oh, they're still losing points on that even after we talked about it. So the point of that is to make sure that you have good code that doesn't crash. It's not to make you lose all these points. So I guess that's why I'm bringing it up, not to shame anyone. I just want to make sure people understand what I expect and how to avoid that happening. Because I don't want, that always makes me sad when I say, yeah, I mean, it's my automatic penalties. I'm not, nobody's saying anything. So, okay, I mean, we're going to keep taking, Sid's going to keep taking away those points. So, I mean, please test that before turning it in. It's a sad way to lose points after putting in all that time on the assignment.
So you mean that the problem you mean that the build items and the project is the problem? So if I don't build the assets for this project, I can only build this project, but I can run that in cache. Maybe the asset done that day.
Yes. The problem is people, when Sid is building just the code but not assets, and then running the game, he's getting crashes. Does that make sense? Yes?
For me, like, if I'm building only game, I'm not getting any exception. But if I'm running from Visual Studio, I'm getting exception. Is there any issue with that? Like, I don't know whether why it's happening.
That I don't think that can happen.
I mean, I have right now, if you want to see.
Well, we haven't had that many questions. Let's see. The one thing I can think of that would cause that, you can set up Visual Studio. Wait, this is on your monitor?
Yeah.
Nobody has the problem with this is nobody can see. Let's see if we can see it quickly. You can configure Visual Studio to break on different kinds of exceptions. You are not ready to show this, are you? So that's one way I can think of that it could possibly happen if it's not a crash, but it's an exception that's not fatal. Then you wouldn't see it when just double clicking. So I guess we can see what kind of exception it is.
It is going on Vortex.
Okay, it's ready. Let's see this. I can only stand at one monitor at a time. But if it's happening to more than one person, then I guess maybe we can figure this out. Well, that's because it's part of the.
So,
Good point. Why is that? I don't know. Let's keep stepping through and see what happens. Is it like there? It seems like it would be. I don't know. Let's stay after, or let's stay after and see if we can figure it out.
maybe it might be because of remote connection, but
You're doing the OpenGL build.
no, I'm doing directly.
That surprises me. That's not what I would expect to see. So I don't know. I don't have an answer. Still, if your point is that you ran it and you thought everything was okay, I'd say it's not okay. Why not?
Because it's giving me exception.
No, I mean that's true, but there's another thing that's supposed to happen when you run without assets.
It should show the screen, black screen, or the color screen.
No. I mean, that would be okay too, but probably not. What should it do if you run without assets?
It's like gracefully.
Which means what?
Show you like a little error message.
Right. Some message should pop up to the user and say something went wrong.
Application can't initialize.
So in your case, it's just exiting for no apparent reason, right? So it's good that it's not crashing. I don't know why. We could maybe haggle over that and say, oh, instead of, 4 points, it should only be 3? I don't remember. So maybe we can, I don't know why it's doing that. But it's still not what I want, okay? And it sounds like that's happening to Luis too, so I don't know. That's new to me.
Usually what happens is because you're not checking the pointer before you go into that. But it's going to, it's giving me.
Wait. Okay, go on, yes.
Like, so like, if it's an.
Hey, if I stop you from talking, I don't want you to keep talking as soon as I stop, okay? How can I be more clear about this? I'm talking to you too. You know I'm talking to you? Okay, good. Keep going.
So, when you have a null pointer, you can still call a function on it and go into the function. And so, if it happens to be a null pointer, this is what was causing the problem for me in the past. And so, a lot of the time I feel like it's just if you check your pointers before you actually go into it and you return a proper error, like a proper C result failure. Like it's either you're not returning a C result at the right time, or you're going into a point, you're calling a function on a pointer when it's null. Those two cases.
Well, so nobody can see the code because it's on a monitor, but we can see why it's throwing the exception in Visual Studio, right? It's clear why. The question is, when he runs it without Visual Studio, it doesn't pop up and say it crashed, it just exits, which is different than what I claim with that, right? That's the problem. So you understand why it's happening, but why it doesn't look like a crash, it looks like it's exiting. And I don't know. Okay? Any other questions about anything? Okay. So that was one. Second thing, I think only one person in the write-up showed the actual struct I'm talking about the size. I was so happy. I said, thanks for showing that. So I guess I didn't plead enough last time, but do you remember me talking about this last time? If you just show the size, and again, we're not going to take away any points. I didn't ask for this, but for your readers, right, consider showing the struct when I ask for a size, and I'll try to word it better. Okay. Let me look at my notes to make sure I don't forget to say anything. Oh yeah. So now that the assignment's been turned in, let's talk about some of the interfaces, because kind of what I want out of this class, and we've talked about this, is for you to learn how to do good design, and for you to have freedom to be creative and do what you think is good. But now that you've kind of done it, I want to give a little bit of feedback and talk about what I think is good and why some of the things people have done I maybe don't think are as good as it could be. And I didn't want to say this before because it influenced you, so none of the things I'm going to bring up now will be things that we take away points for. The point of the assignment is to figure out what you think is good, right? So this is John Paul opinion stuff. Does that make sense what I'm saying? This isn't right or wrong? Okay. So first of all, a lot of people, I don't know about a lot, but I've seen it quite a bit throughout the different assignments, not just assignment 4, but throughout many of these assignments. When you submitted stuff, the game is submitting a vector of things. So like the graphics submit function expects a vector of things. Does that make sense? It doesn't accept one thing, it accepts many things. Is that good or bad? And why? People who have done it, you must have thought it was good. Why? Does anybody want to say, this is why I did it that way? Does anybody want to say, this is why maybe you would do it this way? If you didn't do it that way, why didn't you? Yes, well, yes, I have.
It just seemed easier to have like just one submit function for one object, and then just do like a list of them instead of like packing like all the rendered things and throwing them in.
Well, you're asking that, but why? Is it? Is it easier and why?
I think because on the fly, like you don't know like how many things are going to be rendering, or like you know you could be like and like keeping track of that vector could be like it's really hard. You like dispose of it, and all that stuff.
How do we know that we don't know how many things are going to be rendered?
Oh, because we have our like limit kind of in our graphics class of or so the my game kind of specifies like what you're going to be giving to graphics projects. Never mind, I don't know what I was trying to say. This seems simpler to like just have one base function. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't mean to intimidate you.
Oh, no, it's all good. Yeah.
Okay. If you catch the thread again, you can raise your hand.
Yeah.
It's also like the vector outside they have overhead, and you create it, it's actually you're using more memory than you could.
So you're saying it's bad because of that?
Yeah, you might not need the vector to compute it.
So the comment is the vector has some overhead. I could agree with that, but let's say we don't care about that. We're just thinking about the interface. So there's a reason you might not want to do it, but let's ignore that for a minute.
So we don't consider performance problem, right?
For now, yeah, let's not consider performance. Let's just consider the ease of use from an interface standpoint. Was there a hand up around here? Oh, I didn't see it.
Which is that it's often, at least from the game's perspective as a game programmer, it makes a lot of sense, especially once you have like a complicated game object and stuff, to be able to just say, here I've made all of my updates, now draw them. You just push them all at once. And some vectorish form of the function for that would just make it easy to do one singular call and sort of move through all of them and call the game. Because I also think as a game programmer, if you were calling the draw, the submit for draw function multiple times in your entire like game logic loop, that's just bad. It's hard to find like where the actual source of the problem is, like if you want to debug at some point. So you wouldn't want to do that. It makes a lot of sense to draw from the game object.
So you're saying it's good to do. Okay.
I think what I was trying to say is in a less wordy, but it's just that like I mean, as far as interfaces go, like it's kind of like there's kind of like this the whole like notion that's kind of abstract of like an interface. So you want to be like as granular as possible. I feel like so you kind of want to know what that function is like for one object before you expand it to like a bunch of objects. And kind of like for like having tons of draw calls, I feel like in the future you would probably have some kind of like messaging system or some kind of way to automate that. So like that you just so that in the future, like, your game object would just be doing that automatically on update, and you wouldn't have to be, like, telling them to draw and stuff like that. So it's probably better, like, when once the engine gets, like, really big and complicated, you kind of just, like, abstract it away, and each game object just do its own thing, and you wouldn't have, like, a manager that's, like, putting them on a list and throwing them in. So it's kind of two different designs, really.
Okay.
I also had a thought. The reason why it's bad
Okay.
is that it becomes a little bit harder to choose to not draw something. I mean, in the end, I guess technically you can because you're building this vector probably at the end of your game logic that says, here are the things you need to draw. And you just exclude the ones you don't want to draw. But sometimes it's also easier to just like, at moments where you're about to draw something, just be like, you know what, let me just skip the one where I draw this. And that's an issue I can see with user perspective.
Okay. Any others? What about from this side of the room? Okay, well let's talk about it. Not just in terms of our class and what we're trying to do, but in terms of designing interfaces, right? I kind of claim that's what this class is about. It's not a graphics class. And we can start thinking about performance issues again, if we want. But what we're trying to decide is, if I have a system and I'm making an interface, what is the easiest interface I can use to help someone use it correctly and not incorrectly and easily. Right? I'm kind of trying to design something to say, this is how you interact with my system if you want to do something. Right? Is it easier to use correctly or incorrectly with the vector or with it separate? Does it matter? What about, is it easier to use, or is it harder to use incorrectly? Harder or easier? What about just easier to use in general? Does it make a difference? We've already had some people talk about that over here. Yes? Why?
If I don't know there is something about vector, I know there is an object, so I can wait it's not. I can just easier to use object in object, maybe you get something like that. A vector sure is extra content, but I need to know that.
I guess I can buy that technically, but I bet if you're a C++ programmer and you see a vector of something, you can probably guess, oh, I can submit as many as I want. So I think I will agree with you technically, but I bet it's not that much of a difference. I think if I saw that, I would know I would guess correctly how to use it. But sure. But what about the other? What about the other side? What if you do want to submit a bunch of stuff? Because you were saying it's easier to do it that way rather than to just call it once rather than a bunch of times. Do you agree with that? Okay. Does anybody? Yep.
Which is that instead of using a vector, it might not be a bad idea to do variable length parameters in your function.
Okay. So sure. And then you talk about overhead. So I'm just saying a vector because I've seen people do that. But we could also have an array or a pointer with a size or something. Okay. Let's talk about this. Nobody's done it, so I don't know if nobody's thinking it or we just have quiet people out here. If I want to submit a single thing to be drawn, which interface is easier to use?
Object.
Or my variable length parameters.
Why? Why is that easier?
What do you mean easier? Because easier like I write if I just understand easier means I write this code.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh that's mean because if I just some object, yeah, I can just get an object and whatever something. But if it's vector, I need to maybe create a vector and push it.
Yes. It's definitely easier to use if I'm just doing one thing. I don't want to have to create a vector and push to the vector and then pass the vector in. If we're talking about efficiency, and I just want to do one thing, I don't want to have to make a vector. Are we agreed? Am I making too big of a leap? Are we agreed that if you're just submitting one thing, it's easier to just have a function that does one thing? Even with your variable length vector. I have to pass in, here's an object and there's going to be one of them.
We don't do that.
I don't.
Is that not how it works in C++? But I do know that there was the option, maybe not in C++, that's a different thing. The idea of being able to have a function that can take any number of parameters, I think that's listed
Oh.
in the.
I didn't know that's what you meant.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay, well that case I would say is problematic because you're saying you want to batch everything together, so you're not going to have a function that has 1,000 things in it, right?
Yeah, that's bad. Never mind.
But okay, granted, if there were something like that, and there kind of is now with the way you can initialize vectors, then you maybe could do it that way. But so are we agreed that if you're only submitting one thing, that a vector is probably not as good as a simpler function? Does anybody disagree? Okay. So what about this argument, I'm never gonna just submit one thing. If I'm the game, I'm gonna submit lots of things. Is that valid? Is that worth saying, well, I'm gonna make a function for the common case that submits a vector? Is that good? Is that a better design or is that a worse design? Yeah?
I feel like most game development we've done up to this point are always creating an object in one object at a certain point in time. We're never really batching a whole bunch of objects at the same time. If it did want to be batching an object, that would be like hidden from us in some interfaces of sorts, I think.
When you submit it, what are you going to do in the submit function? What does the submit function actually do with this? Whether it's one thing or many things.
It doesn't care.
It doesn't care. What does it do?
Because he only just submit a structure. This whether or not it's really he just submits data to render. But for there is some problem for the logic for how we to wrap the data to submit its data to render pipeline. I think the graphics don't care about what the structure is, but for the developer, they will trouble or not. It will trouble you to submit its data to graphics. So in my preference, I think it's good to have each function for the area pipeline for me.
Okay, but that was a good answer, but I don't know if you answered what I was asking, or at least what I was trying to ask.
Misunderstood your
But
question.
you're going to have some kind of bucket, right? And you're going to put stuff in that bucket. Even if the game passes in a vector of things, what are you going to do with that vector?
You integrate it with any structure.
You're going to copy stuff to your bucket, right? And then you did say this, it doesn't really matter whether it's one or many. From the graphics perspective, it doesn't care, right? There's no advantage to the graphics to getting a collection of stuff. That's not the point, but are we agreed that there's no advantage? Is there a disadvantage
To what?
to passing in a bunch of stuff?
Other than that, you lose some level of like control over each individual thing, and it's not as standard, or it becomes harder. Otherwise, I think.
So it's funny you're saying that. That's not exactly true, right? The game still has to do something.
Yeah, sure.
But that gets to the point of what I'm trying to get at. In my opinion, again, this is John Paul's opinion, the interface should absolutely be, here's a single thing to do. And the reason why is because that's what graphics is trying to do. There's no advantage to say, oh, submit many things at the same time. And by doing that, you're putting an actual burden on the game. So a lot of you are thinking, oh, the gameplay programmer, I'm going to make it easier for the gameplay programmer. Right? And that's exactly what we're trying to do in this class. So by having this discussion and by spending so much time, I'm trying to help us to think about that. That's good. The whole point of the class is to make a good interface, to make it easier. So that's the right motivation to say, I want to make it easier so they can just do it all at one time. But you're actually not making it easier. You're making an assumption about what the game programmer is wanting to do. And you don't know what the game programmer is wanting to do, right? If you're forcing them to make a single call and say, you have to make a vector of everything you want to do and then give it to me, you're not making it easier on them, right? You're making it harder. If the game wants to do that, what's the solution? And this is maybe the key. If the gameplay programmer wants to make a big long list then submitted at one time. The game can write a function to do that, right? The game can write a submit data function that takes a vector of things and then do a for loop. Does that make sense? Does that seem funny? Does anybody think that does anybody disagree with that?
I don't disagree with that particularly,
Yeah.
but there is a concern that had we think of the vector thing as a good idea, we hadn't really done.
Okay.
Which is, it's what I call idiot proofing the code, and it's a bit of a quality of life thing for the gameplay programmer. If you, in your system, maybe this is what you have, but in your system, if you allow for like a nice issue of concern, which makes it easier to debug later, and almost force the gameplay programmer to conform to that, then it'll actually make their life easier in the long run. So what did you say about like harder to make a mistake? It's that sort of thing. That was what I was attempting, maybe this is the issue.
You think it's harder to make a mistake if the programmer has to pass in a single vector?
I won't necessarily say a single vector, that's going too far, but that all of your drawing happens isolated or like after all of your updating, separate from each other. Maybe I misunderstood.
I guess I disagree. To me, it's harder to make a struct and add things to a vector and calling a function and saying, do this, and letting someone else decide how to do that. I think there's more chance for error when you require someone to make a vector.
Again, it's not about making a vector, it's about finding the source of an error.
Okay.
Like you're bug hunting
Yes.
through your code, right? And you want to be able to isolate, is the problem in the update or in the draw, for example. Then it becomes a lot easier if all of your draw stuff is separate, all your update stuff is separate, and you can touch one without like, breaking the other.
I think that's true, but you shouldn't be submitting while updating. Right? All your submitting stuff has to happen in that submit.
Right?
Data
Yeah.
be rendered
So maybe
on.
that's why it just, maybe it's not as long. I don't know.
I think what she wants to say is something like if we force the user to submit a vector, we make sure that they call the submit function at once. Instead of maybe someone will call the submit function at multiple times during different phases. That kind of thing.
Is that what you're trying to say?
I didn't fully understand. I was actually looking at it.
I mean, fair enough. There's a lot of different opinions that people can have about this. What about this back row? What do you guys think?
Good idea.
What about this back row over here? What do you think? What are we talking about?
What's a good idea, right, guys?
You repeat the question.
No, that's the point. That's the point of me asking. Can you repeat anything we've talked about recently?
Not the last minute.
What about the last 5 minutes? Second row. What about you guys?
I would say just adding more
Hooray!
adding more options to the interface is never like a bad thing until it gets a certain point, and then you have like too much. So I would say like if you wanted to include it, then that's fine.
So that's a good point. You could say maybe you have 2 different versions. One where you can submit one or submit many. Something that DirectX does a bunch of times is it lets you pass in a pointer and a count. I thought this is what you were saying originally when you talked about it. And then it's not too hard if you just want to do one to just pass in the single thing and say 1. So that's true. Okay. what about if instead of passing in a vector of things, a lot of you have created a struct to combine things. So rather than saying, I'm going to make the user pass in a 3D object and an effect, I'm going to make a struct that's like a renderable object and let them pass that in. Right? A bunch of you have done that. Is that good or bad? Does that make it easier or harder?
I think it's easier.
Why?
Because its will to transfer its underlying object into the bucket, and I do it very easily to the copy code structure like that.
And why is that easier for the game programmer?
Because he knows the geometry and the effect construct the render object. He only need to care what we want to render. He know there is something I want to render, and he just needs to update the status of its resource.
So let's take an example. Let's say I have a submit object function, and it takes an object and an effect. Let's type this out. That'll make it easier. Let's say I have submit 1, and it takes some object and some effect. And then I have submit 2, and it takes some struct. Right? So you're saying that version 2 is easier.
Yeah.
And I'm asking why, and you said because the gameplay programmer knows that they can use a constructor to make that. Did I follow the argument?
Kind of. Yeah. Because I think it's easier for me to construct its structure for how to set in the game object. How to set a game object.
So you think it's easier to make one of those than to pass in 2 parameters?
To pass the structure. I didn't exactly to implement this function. I just to implement some code on the submit render. I don't implement a new function. I know the meaning of it, but I didn't implement it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes?
I think one thing is that, well, on the struct, you can kind of enforce some restrictions when you create the struct.
Okay.
Right? Like for the constructor for the struct, you can say you have to pass in an effect, you have to pass in a geometry when you create the struct.
How can you enforce that?
The constructor, you make it so that it only has one constructor, not a default constructor.
Okay.
Right? You can do that. And then it also, in a bit, provides some context of what you're passing, I feel. Like passing a single effect in a single object, or in general, you're trying to pass a render object of some sort. So it provides some English context to it, I feel. What I feel he's saying, maybe.
So you think that having a constructor that takes some object and some effect enforces good behavior more than having a function that takes some object and some effect?
Possibly.
How? Doesn't this
Well,
force someone to pass it in the same way that it would in a constructor?
So another reason I did this that way, is that I wanted to expand the functionality so that eventually you could swap effects and swap render objects without having to force to swap the other one. That's one reason I did that. So
Okay. Let's stick with what you said before though. So keep that in mind, that's good. But what if you said you can enforce correct behavior?
Enforce?
Isn't that what you said?
Yeah.
If you put in a constructor,
Yes.
It seems to me that that exact same enforcement happens when you do that. Is that not true, or am I missing it?
True, I mean, I guess it depends on how you put your checks, right?
Does it?
Yeah.
How are the checks different?
Putting the checks in inside the individual struct versus inside the individual function call.
And you think that's better?
I think it doesn't matter.
I think it does matter, but I think it's opposite to what you're saying. Because in the constructor, what do you do if someone does it wrong?
The object isn't made valid or something?
And then what do you do when you pass it to submit to? How do you know the object isn't valid? Why is that? I don't understand why that's supposed to be better if you have an invalid object. So
I did expand the functionality.
So in the constructor, I think it's worse because the constructor can't return any return value. So if you're saying that it's good because you can check and enforce correctness, then something like this would be better. Instead of void, you can say see result or something. Okay, let's hold your other thought because you have a hand. Yes.
Well, wasn't the thing that like constructor's never supposed to fail?
Correct.
So you can't test it by trying to make it faulty, I guess?
Yes. So you're agreeing with me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not buying that for the constructor. So let's go to your other thing that you said. Hold that thought. So you said another reason it's good.
Was that I wanted to make a wrapper class where you could swap in effects as well as objects. So I do set effect instead of having to submit both the object and effect every time. Is one reason, and then instead I submit the whole object. I put like some function on that to submit the render object.
So you think that it's easier to switch objects and effects if you have a struct?
Oh well, I guess I should mention something that class. Or I guess
class,
I
right?
guess we do instruction.
But you think it's easier to swap things if you have that version 2 rather than version 1?
Yes.
So what's an example of something you might want to swap?
An effect, just effect.
Just an effect, so I have the same object, but I have a different effect?
Yeah, so I call a function on it set effect to change the effect of the object, and then I submit the object using the second method.
Yes.
I don't know.
That seems harder to me than the first method. The first method seems much easier to do something like what you're saying. I'm not following. Because you don't even have to change any struct or class or anything. You just say, draw this thing with this thing. Well, I'm not saying you're wrong. I just don't understand why it's easier.
It's preference. Being possibly.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Yes.
I think the geometry in fact is part of the graphics, and as a game developer, I don't care about what's the context or what's the content, what the exact render object has. I just to render struct. It could have some actual settings like we need to convert the object axis to the word axis. So I just to add an actual matrix into the structure. So it's harder to just use the first function if I just want to add one more matrix into its function. But it's easier to add some more settings to the structure other than the first function.
You're saying because then you don't have to go and update your code everywhere.
Because there is some setting for the graphics afterwards maybe, and for this assignment we need to update our geometry based on the conversion from the local object axis to the word axis, right? So I think it's a kind of the attribute of the render object. So I just to add one attribute to its structure. So afterwards, if we want to add some attributes or just settings for the graphics, it's easier to the game developer. They don't need to care about the setting of the graphics. It's only need to use the second function. They don't care about what setting is.
But where does this sum struct come from? I mean, I don't understand. They have to care about it in that second function.
It's maybe a default setting somehow, or just platform specific. I don't know. Maybe just provide extra function for the game developer use, but they don't care about the exact variable is or setting is. Maybe.
So you're saying, what if there's a case where there's a default value,
Yeah.
and we can put that in the constructor,
Yeah.
and then we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. And
Do you think that applies here?
It's also good to use some functions to tell the game developer you can change the render by its functionality, but game developer don't care about what the actual setting or variable they need to change, but to only use the structured functions to change the effect or something like that, or just combination of the graphic settings.
So you didn't answer my question, I noticed. So you think that a gameplay programmer doesn't care what the effect is?
They care, but there is some part of the graphics, I think.
It could or couldn't.
In what cases couldn't you say?
Maybe they want to just use the default effect and they just care for the geometry of how that's a possibility, right?
Okay, that's what we think, that I'm just going to use a default effect?
Yeah.
Okay. Will that happen?
Possibly.
I mean, even if you use the default value, you can also set it in the function. So it doesn't matter if you use the default function.
Let's talk about it. If the gameplay programmer wants to use a default value, then we think the game can decide, or the graphics system, I messed up. If the game wants to use a default value, then we think that the graphics can make it easier for the game by providing that default value and then not forcing the game to decide what to use. Is that what we're saying? Does anybody want to disagree based on the way I phrased that? Yes?
Different games might want to have different default values.
Would they?
Depends on the game you're in.
For the human interface.
Or is he right that a different game might want a default value? Who should decide what the default value is? Should it? I mean, that was so persuasive, you've all changed your mind now? So if game decides, what can it do to do exactly what you want?
What?
No, even simpler. It's something you've had to do in assignment 5. You've done this already in assignment 5. What can you do? If you want this behavior, if you want the game to not have to worry about things, if you want to make it so that the game can have default behavior,
Initialization.
you can make your own kind of representation, right? You can make a game object. And you can say, okay, in my game object, I'm going to make a default effect. And it can be whatever I want. Right? You can do that. You can make a struct that has its own constructor and fancy convenience functions. And in fact, that's why I make you do this as part of assignment 5, to say, oh, I can make the game behave any way that I want. There's no reason you have to have a game object representation. In fact, in my reference implementation, I do almost everything I make you do. But that's one thing I don't do because I don't really care. To me, it's easier to just use the graphics things directly. But the point is, if you want to have behavior that makes it easier to use things, and easier in the sense of there's default behavior, you can do that. But the problem is if you try to make the graphics system decide what that is, then who knows if that will be true for every game. Who knows what kind of a game you're making or what your gameplay programmer is going to be doing. So again, this is John Paul opinion, not right or wrong, but I generally prefer version 1. There's going to be a time if you have too many of these, right? If you have 15 parameters, then version 1 is going to be dumb. So, right, I mean, I'm not saying like always, 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 but in general, version 2 means that for me to use it, I have to call a constructor and pass in these exact same parameters. And that's extra work for me, when I would rather just say, here's graphics, tell me what you need and I'll give it to you. Tell me exactly what you need and I'll give it to you. And based on that, I can create my own representation for how I want to manage it. In your cases, I forgot who said it. In your case, when you're swapping things, you can make your total convenience function, your game object, to work any way that you want. But the thing is, if there's some kind of render object, either you're creating it every frame, in which case it's not really easier to swap, or you're thinking of it as some kind of persistent thing between frames. And if you're thinking of it persistent between frames, then the graphics shouldn't know about that. That should be something that the application figures out and says, oh, here's a convenient way of managing this. This is how I want to manage things. If I say, can I switch effects? How does the gameplay programmer want to interact with that? And the graphics just says, for this specific frame, this is what I want. Does that make sense, even if you don't agree? Yes?
I thought opposite question. It's also like for the software matrix, we only use the orientation and rotation of the number, but it has other values. So should we have an interface that only takes those two vectors, or should we have one that takes the full logic state?
So that's a great question. I'm not going to answer directly, but let's try to have a discussion, and maybe it'll be enough to answer the question, or at least think about things, right? Because again, in this class, there's always you have to figure out what you need to do the specific assignments. And I always say it's not about graphics, but then you have to do the graphics, right? So there's part of that, but part of figuring out kind of the general sense. So when you have this submit function, regardless of whether it looks like version 1 or version 2, what you're trying to do is, as a graphics system, you're saying, I want to get the information I need so that I can put stuff in my bucket, right? That's your goal. But you don't necessarily need to have the game give you everything, right? Your goal is, I need to know what I put in the bucket, but that doesn't mean that the game has to give you everything that you put in the bucket directly. Instead, what you're really saying is, game, give me what I need so that I can figure out what I need to put in the bucket. Does that distinction make sense? The game shouldn't know how rendering works. Remember we said, the game doesn't want to know about vertex buffers or anything, right? The game doesn't want to know how rendering works. So as much as possible, if you want to make a good interface, you want to give the game a function that they can think of intuitively. You say, okay, as a gameplay programmer, I want you to draw this thing in this position, and I want it to look like this. And I don't care what you do with that information. With me? So, the game gives information to graphics, and the graphics takes that information and maybe does some kind of magic on it, and then caches stuff in the bucket so that it can grow. With me so far? Okay, so your question was, do we actually pass in the full matrix? Or should we maybe pass in something that's more convenient for the game? Right? Maybe we just have to pass in the position and the orientation instead of the matrix. Right? That's the question?
Yeah, you can do it normally, or you can just start with the rigid body state concept and tell it it's the same with
So you could do that too, right? There's a bunch of options. The question is, what should the game have to worry about? What's the game's responsibility? And what should graphics worry about? And what's graphics' responsibility? I have an opinion about this, but I kind of don't want to give my opinion in class. But it's a really good question, and it's a really good discussion to have. So if people have opinions, I think we should tell us. But just so you know, I'm going to try and not give away what I think, because that's part of the assignment. But yes?
Like, kind of in my head, it's kind of like some kind of pyramid where it gets like more, like it starts out very general, but it gets more specific as you go down. It's like, in my game, it's like very general for the game programmer, but as you trickle down into the systems, then it, like, game objects are, get stripped down into all those little parts. So I feel like we should pass in the game object, then let graphics dismantle it and take away needs. Just as a design.
That definitely makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What's the problem with that?
The overhead, I guess, is that you have this big bulky object that's being,
No graphics.
Yes, that's the problem.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
So did everybody hear that? What's the problem?
Graphics and all these games.
It makes a lot of sense to do it that way, to say, oh, here's the game object,
But it is another.
but graphics can't know about the game.
That's
So
true.
you could do something like that,
Yeah.
but you would need some kind of intermediate renderable object.
Okay, so kind of like
thing.
okay, so like, kind of like a Russian doll, so you kind of throw in the next.
Yes.
Okay, that
You
makes
could
sense.
say,
Yeah.
all right, I'm going to have some kind of struct that has an object in effect and an S rigid body state
Okay.
and whatever.
I think I made that mistake because like in the last assignment I had like a render object, but then for this one I had just like turn it into the game object. And now actually thinking back, it's like kind of complicated to have everything in one place. So you probably want like a game object that contains a render object and other things that you.
I've already kind of given away which of these I prefer. Do you remember which one?
Game object.
So
Yeah.
why do I not think you should do some kind of nested render object? Now you could,
Yeah.
but why not? What advantage is it going to give you?
Just the generality that everything can use it. You have to be specific for everything. They can all have the same interface.
But it then means that the game object has to worry about this.
Oh, right, yeah.
And you asked the question earlier about physics. What if you have a physics system and it wants to know about an S rigid body? And so on and so on. Now you can do it.
Okay.
And maybe that's what Pluto is saying, why it makes sense to have a rigid body. Or not a rigid body, a renderable object.
Actually, for me, it's a division for the abstraction layer because I want to wrap some attribute into a render object because I think it's too complicated for the game object to have all the things. It's something like the physics status because it's a lot of variables just to store in the game object. So I wrap it into the physics layers. It's same for the geometry and the effect for me. So I did something like that.
I don't know if I follow, but I also don't know if I agree. But that's okay. That's what this class is about, is figuring out how to design stuff. But this lot of good things you learn. In terms of design and architecture, not any of the cool technical stuff you learn like threading and binary files, but in terms of kind of design and architecture, this sort of question is probably the most important thing to think about in this class, and it's why, even though it sort of maybe seems boring, I'm spending so much time on it. Okay. Probably shouldn't. But right, if you think about your question and you think, well, whose job is it to calculate this matrix? They're so confident. Right. We know that the graphics needs to put in the bucket. Should it get passed in directly like that and it just puts it in the bucket? Should something else be passed in and it calculates it and then puts that in the bucket? If so, what should be passed in? Should it pass in a rigid body state? Should it pass in just the position and orientation? There's a bunch of different questions, and I think if you start thinking about it, you might also notice that there are some problems, right? It's not quite as simple as what I'm saying. And whatever you do, the way to calculate the matrix is pretty clear, right? There's a function that I've given you to do it. And so, if you think about the generated assembly code that the compiler will create and that will actually get run when you run the game, there's a bunch of different places this calculation can happen. And it will be correct, right? It'll look the same on screen. And a lot of times, when we're programming, we just got to get things done, and we don't really think about it like whatever works. We say, if I do it right there, it's easy. I'm going to do it, and it'll be done. But a part of this class, right, part of what we try to learn is this kind of question like, where should it be and why? Whose responsibility is it and why? Is it better somewhere else? Should graphics do it or not? So I'm not going to answer. It's a great question. Hopefully you all, if you've already finished your assignment, you've thought about it a little bit. I don't know. Maybe some of you have reevaluated how you did it now that I've said it and thought, oh, maybe it makes sense some other way. So again, graphics is low level. And so it kind of doesn't want to know anything that's going on. Right? There's a little bit of a hint. Okay. Any other questions that have come up while I've been talking? I think I went over my notes. Well, maybe we'll take, yes?
Is there a certain limitation on how many parameters they should be passing in the function? As you mentioned, if they got too many, we should just calculate.
I don't know the technical details, and it probably depends on platform. If you know the mechanics of how function parameters work, you have to push stuff on the stack. So the problem with passing in a struct, I wrote it like that, but it's probably going to be a reference to a struct, right? Then you have an indirection with a pointer, but you only have to pass one thing on this. It's hard, and there probably is a limitation, but you probably won't run into it unless you're trying to pass 50 or something, right? So I don't know. It's hard to make a general rule. I tend to have a failing. I tend to make long function signatures. A lot of people hate it. So I don't think just because I like that, I mean, it's probably bad style, I'll be honest. I don't know. I don't know the answer. You kind of have to use your judgment there. Eventually it will become a problem just because you have to pass so much stuff. Any other questions? Okay, let's take a break. We'll start again at 7:41. Started with code that I gave you where everything was kind of in its own file, right? Graphics created stuff and rendered the triangle right then. And then slowly we've been moving it out and trying to abstract it. And where we are now after assignment 5 is that the game is in charge of doing stuff and submits stuff, and the graphics just does what the game tells it to, right? So the next step in our journey is to take the data out of code into a file. Why might we want to do this? Why would this be a good thing to have the data in a file rather than in code?
It is data-driven.
Yes, but who cares? Is that good? I mean, is that something we want, and why? That's the real question, right? Is this a good thing? Why? Is it so obvious?
Yeah.
Why?
Because not having billions of rows of vertices in your my games
All right.
Yeah.
So in our case, it's not so bad, right? We just have a triangle and a square, not so bad. But if you imagine trying to do something like God of War, your favorite game, then that would be pretty ridiculous to have source code that had the vertices like that, and have the programmer have to type it all in. And then if an artist says, "Oh, I want to change this vertex," like right there, no, that one, and the programmer is searching through and okay, so that's good. Any other reasons it's good in general? Yes.
I think it simulates you couple your assets with the simulate you separate your assets and your main project. That you can like you don't really only you have to check some errors about the game because you get care about your assets and your data like that.
Okay. I don't know if I'm totally following. In terms of us grading, it's good because we can not build assets and see what happens. But why is it good to be able to separate like that? Why is it nice having it separate?
Because the effects are not only related to programmers, but it's also related to different developers, like artists or something. So they don't want to be going into the code and making changes to that.
So there are two reasons that there's a bunch more, but two kind of high-level reasons that I think you've mentioned that are kind of related to that. One is if you have data that's not part of code, then you don't need to recompile the game if you want to make a change. And as part of that, you don't need a programmer to make a change. We laughed about the God of War thing, but in less ridiculous cases, this can be nice too. Design, for example, we talk a lot about graphics because that's what I do and that's how we teach the class, but there's all sorts of data that you can have, and designers especially love being able to tweak data. And usually when new systems are brought online, the programmer writes it, and they write it thinking like a programmer. And if the creative people on the team want to make any changes, they have to go to the programmer's door and say, "Hey, that's cool, but could we make it a little bit slower, or could we change the hit points on that, or can we play the animation just maybe 2 frames later or something?" Right? There's stuff like that. The programmer's like, okay. Let me once I push this, then I'll get to the right. And there's this huge iteration time before the designer can see it again. And so making things data separate from code has that dual advantage where it's nice because you don't have to change code, you don't have to recompile, and artists, designers, creative content people can change it and see stuff without any programmer involved. Right? You see how those are two sides of the same coin? And I think that's kind of what you were saying, right? Hopefully. So, in general, when we say we want stuff to be data-driven, it is good. And the goal actually would be to make the entire game data-driven. That would be the ideal, because then it would mean that content creators can make a game without having to rely on the technical people. And stuff like Unity is actually getting pretty close to that now, right? You can make a pretty good Unity game without having to program anything, right? So that's cool. We're getting closer. It's much different than the old days. In practice, though, if you work on any real game, and you all are for your projects, you'll find that just like the ideal in the over-architecting versus hacky way is probably too much. People like me would say, oh, it's going to be so beautiful, but it takes too long, right? Sometimes it's good to just get it done. You'll find the same thing is true with data-driven stuff. It's one thing to be in class and to have your teacher get up here and say, everything should be data-driven, and that's true, but it takes more work to set up. So you have to kind of evaluate, is it going to be worth it versus can I just do it in code? And if I have to work with a creative person for a few days to dial it in, but then we never have to change it again and we're good, then that's probably a good decision. It's going to save you time versus what we're going to start doing in class now, where we say, oh, we're going to make all these systems and then create tools in order to use them. Does that make sense? So what we're doing now is the ideal, and you'll have to evaluate in the real world how often it's worth doing this. Just like I like personally designing things and taking the time to not do it hacky, it probably will come as no surprise to you that my personal feeling is I really like to make things data-driven so that people can look at files and change it. There were so many times in Avalanche where I'd noticed that we had done the easy thing to get it working, and then I'd see what we had to do to make any changes, and I'd think, what? But why? What? But you know, then it's too late to change anything. Nobody wants to put in the time. So who knows? There you go. There's my advice. So let's talk about it. So what we're going to do for assignment 6 is take these 3D object geometry things that we have and move the data into files. So you're going to load in a geometry file, extract the data, and use that to initialize your representation. Okay? So right now, you have some kind of factory function, and you say, create a 3D object, and here's the data I want you to use to create it, and it will pass you back a pointer. In assignment 6, you're going to have a factory function, but instead of passing in the data, you're going to say, what? Say, here's a path. I don't know what the data's in it. Some artist just told me to use this. And then your factory function will open the file, get the same data that you used to pass into your factory function, right? Extract that same data from the file. And then it can do the same initialization that it did before. Does that make sense how we're going to hook it up? Instead of passing in the data, we pass in a file path. You open the file, extract the data, and then do the same thing you did before. Questions?
Yes. Do we have to have the, does it make a, it's something like it's very important for the creative function to be able to use this file instead of having an individual function.
Is it important to have the function be able to read the file?
Factory function to read directly from the file instead of having another function given and pass the data to the factory function.
Yes. The factory function will be a load function. It'll say load this file.
Why?
Because
I mean, there could be a third-party library or function that you might see and they call the factory function.
you're saying, could I still create dynamic geometry if I want to? We could do it that way, but we're not in this class because that doesn't happen very much in game. Now, I shouldn't say that that's not true. You know, you might want to make dynamic geometry, but in this class, what we're trying to do is this kind of conceptual journey, right? We're not making the best graphics engine that we can. We're saying, look, we can go from having hard-coded data and make all these steps along the way so that we have a data build pipeline. It gets built the way we want. We load it. The game is in charge, and our other systems just do it. So that's why it's because that's what we're doing in this class. And similarly, for the system that you make for your first project, I'm hoping most of you will do kind of the same things we do here. You can think of the way that the data is specified. You'll come up with a file that can get loaded, and it will be data-driven. So the reason is because we're not doing a graphics class, we're not trying to say, if I were making a real engine, how would my renderer work, and what if I wanted to do dynamic geometry? Instead, we're trying to learn how data works. Does that answer? Good enough? Any other questions? Okay, so how does the file get there that we want to load? If you remember, traditionally in classes, every class I ever took from the U, they never addressed this. You would just say, well, I'll just put the file there and run the program and hope it works, right? But in our class, we have this nice build pipeline. We talked about it quite a bit in the early assignments, and we haven't really talked about it much lately. But we need some way of getting the file to the right place. And where is the right place? Does anyone remember? Yes, so in that game install directory. So somehow, you're going to author the files in your content directory. And then when you build the solution, we need to build those files so that they end up automatically in the data directory. So that when Sid is correcting your assignments, and he builds the game and he builds the assets, he can then run it or double click it, and it will be there. And when it tries to load these geometry files, it will find them. So in addition to changing the way the runtime works, when I say runtime, do you know what I mean? In addition to changing the way that the game works while it's running, we need to add new functionality to our data pipeline, to our build system, so that we can build these files so that they're in the right place, just like shaders are. Okay? So there's a bunch of stuff we need to do for this assignment. One, we need to create a file format for geometry. That's the fun part. You'll all create your own individual file format. You'll say, this is how I'm going to specify geometry. And then we need to make a program, an actual exe program that can run, that will be called Geometry Builder. It'll be a tool, it won't be part of the game. It's not something you're going to ship, it's not something you put on your website. It'll be a program that we use internally. And we'll build that program, and then when we build assets, it will run that program with the source path, and that program will build it and spit out the destination paths in game install directory. And then you'll update your game code, your runtime code, to load these files, to change the factory function from create, passing in the data, to load, passing in the path. You'll extract the data from this file, and you do that based on whatever format you decided, right? You make the file, and you'll extract the pieces of data from that file, and then you'll call initialize with that data, and then your game will work the same way that it did before. And that's assignment 6. It's really cool, actually, in my opinion. Because the cool thing we can do with this now that we'll do in assignment 7 is we can export stuff from Maya. I've kind of previewed this already, right? Once we have our file format, even though for this assignment it will be little squares and triangles, but once we have the format, we can then make Maya export to that same format, and then we can load things. Okay? So this is the start of being able to bring in real stuff to our game. Any questions? Yeah?
Usually, you mentioned that there is individual exe program, and you call it geometry builder.
Yes.
How does it work in that way?
We'll get to that. Good question. So
I don't quite understand how does it work. It seems, based on my understanding, it seems like maybe it's a different kind that you can choose. You open this program. You open this program.
It
you
is.
choose you want to generate a triangle or something, and there are some effects you can choose, and you can generate a file, generate a raw file.
we'll talk about it. You're envisioning the wrong thing. Unfortunately, that would be cool. There's two kinds of tools. There's what I call content creation tools, That would be something like Maya or Photoshop that a creative person, a content creator, would actually use. And I think that's what you have in mind. When I say geometry builder, you're thinking, oh, I can make geometry. But that's not what we're going to do. We're not going to make content creation tools. The content creation tool is going to be Notepad or Visual Studio, and you're going to have to write the file yourself. So you'll be the content creator. But then there's a second kind of tool, and that's what we are going to make, that massages the data into something we can use. In the case of shaders, we haven't really talked about how it works, but there's a program called Shader Builder, and it takes the source code that you write when you did your animated color shader in assignment 1. There was a Shader Builder program that took that and compiled it. And we tend to think like, oh, it's just a compiler, but it's doing exactly the same kind of thing you're going to do in this assignment. It says, let me take the source file and make it into the file that the game can use. And that is what Geometry Builder is going to do. It takes something that has already been created in one format and puts it in a different format in place so the game can use.
More deeply, is there the one format in one file, the other format?
Let's talk about that right now. Okay? All right. In our class, every kind of asset we have, we'll have 2 different versions. This is definitely one of those John Paul opinion things. Okay, so I have to be careful to emphasize this a lot so that you know this is not only, this isn't the right way to do it, this isn't the only way to do it. This is how I did it at Avalanche. This is how I think the best way to do it is. But even at Avalanche, there were many different kinds of assets besides the ones I was in charge of that were done in a different way. Does that make sense? So you're getting sort of the John Paul's guide to how I think the world should be, but it's not the only way to do it. So according to John Paul, in this class, we're going to have 2 kinds of files by the end of the class. For assignment 6, that's not true. But eventually we'll have 2 kinds of files for every piece of content. One is going to be the file that is our source version. It's the file that the content creator works with. It's the file that you can imagine if I were working with Maya or Photoshop or Substance Designer or something like that. That's kind of the file I would use. It's the file that the artist checks into source control. And then there's going to be a second kind of file that is in a form that the game can use. And it may not be obvious that those 2 forms are different. But if we just think about Photoshop, that's an easy one to think about because most of you have experience with images. You can think that in Photoshop you're probably going to be using JPEGs or PNGs, maybe TIFFs or TGAs, or right? I mean, there's lots of formats, but it's going to be something like that, right? Maybe you'll just have PSDs if you're using Photoshop directly. You with me when I say that? Those aren't the kinds of images that are ideal to be used in a game, though. Some games will load them, but most won't. Definitely something like Unreal or Unity is not going to do it that way. Instead, what they want to do is some kind of transformation on that. And if we're thinking about PCs, it will probably be into a DDS file. You ever worked with DDS files before? Okay, so you're kind of familiar with this. If you try to open a DDS in Photoshop, what happens? Depends if you have the plugin or not, but it probably won't work, right? DDS is a poor example of a file format that an artist works with. There's a lot of things wrong with it. But it's a really good example of a file format that the computer can use. DDS file is a good example of something that the graphics hardware can use directly. And so in a game, you'll have your source image that's going to be like a PNG or a JPEG, and you'll build it into something like DDS. You'll say, the artist creates something, and I'm going to build it into something else that my game can use, and that's what it's actually going to load and use. And there's this build step. You with me so far? For our geometry, we're going to do a similar thing. We're going to have our source version, and it's going to be human readable. That's a phrase I'll start saying a lot. And we'll build that eventually in a future assignment into a binary file. And that binary file is not going to be human readable, except by you, because you'll learn to read the matrix when we get to that assignment. But initially, if you try to look at that file, if you open it in Photoshop or something, it will look like garbage. Have you ever opened a binary file and said, what is this? There's just weird symbols. That's what your geometry file will look like. But it will be in the perfect form for your game and engine to load and to use. And so we have these two different files, right? We have a human readable file that gets checked into source control and is part of our source content. And then we have the binary non-human readable files that get built, and it's what is actually used by the game. Is that a hand? No. So in this first assignment where we start working with files, in assignment 6, we're just going to be using the human readable file. And sometimes it's a little confusing for students because a lot of the things that I try to emphasize when making human readable file, they think, but I want it to be efficient. And I say it doesn't matter. Why do I say it doesn't matter if the human readable file is efficient? Yes, because we're going to have our binary file, and that we're going to make as efficient as possible. It will be hard to understand, but it will be efficient and small. So it's a little bit hard to see the whole picture in this assignment, but that's what you have to remember, that we're only doing the first half of this. But we still want it to work, so we're going to do the first half, and we're going to have some inefficiencies at first, because we're going to make a file that has different priorities than our eventual goal, but your game is still going to load that file. But it's okay if when it loads it, it's inefficient, because remember, eventually we will make it into a binary file that will be very efficient. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay, so for assignment 6, you're going to create a human readable file, and that's going to be Lua. The only reason it's Lua is because it makes it easier. I have to emphasize this a lot. When I teach you to make all of our human readable files in this class will be Lua. That doesn't mean that that's how games do it. In fact, I bet most games don't do it that way. But Infinity really did. This is very close to how I did it. So this is something you can do, but does that make sense? This isn't the usual way to do it. When I first was teaching a class like this, what I did is I said, okay, everybody, make your own file formats. And I thought, oh, this will be a fun assignment. And it turned out being a nightmare because I guess I've done, I don't know. Because when you're a new teacher, you don't think about things like this. But it took them hours and hours, and they had never done this before, and the file formats were terrible. And I thought, this isn't what I wanted to teach. So since then, I've changed. Now we always do Lua because it makes it easier to do. But it's not because it's the right way. It's because we only have to spend one assignment doing it, and then we can use Lua for everything else, and we don't have to worry about it. Does that make sense? So it's going to be Lua-based, not because Lua is the way to make files, but because, why? It's easier in our class, and especially now that Joe started doing it. When I first did this, we had a separate Lua assignment, but now, right, does Joe still do that, I hope? Okay, so you're all Lua pros, so that makes it even better. So we're going to use Lua just because it's a shortcut, but there are different ways of doing it. Okay? So right now, we're going to make a file together. Hooray. We're recording this, right? This is one part that I don't have in the assignment write-up. So this is it. We'll go through it together, and this is what you got. So, okay, every Lua asset in our game is going to look kind of like this. Is this big enough to read for everybody? Raise your hand if you want it bigger. One person, okay. Maybe there's others that didn't want to say it. Good? All right. Now again, there's different ways of doing this. This isn't right or wrong, this is just how we do it in this class. So it always has return and then what does this mean? What am I returning?
Is it a stack or something?
Object.
Okay, good. We'll have a little review. This is a table. It's returning a table.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's been so long. Okay. So this is nice because then when you load it, you say, in Lua, you'll say sum table equals load this file, and then you just get the table. So that's why we do it this way. There's other ways to do it too. So every Lua-based human readable file we make is going to have this pattern. And then the data that we put in the table is going to be whatever we want. And this is up to you to design. When we're making these human readable files, the priority is that they are understandable for a human, that they're easy to read and understand and maintain. What are the three things we want it to be easy to? There's three. But even if you just say one of them, I'll be happy. Easy to read? Easy to maintain? Easy to understand. So let's talk about what it's not. When I say it's easy to read, what that means is it's not necessarily easy to write. Now, this is a little bit different than a lot of code, but the thing you have to remember is that even though we're creating all of these files by hand, usually in the context of the bigger game, it's not going to be created by hand. There will be some other program that will make it. In assignment 7, your Maya exporter will create these files. So if there's a question between, oh, I could do it this way and it would be easier to read and easier to understand, but then it's annoying because I have to type more, you should think to yourself, wait, I don't care about that because I'm not going to be typing it after this assignment. Does that make sense? So we care more about whether it's easy to read and understand than we care about whether it's easy to write. Does that make sense? When I say that it's easy to understand, what I mean is that it's easy to understand for a human. Can anyone think of why we should care whether something's easy to understand for a human?
Much easier for you to edit this file.
That's true, but remember, I'm usually not going to be editing it. It's going to be Maya or Photoshop or a program like that. So that's true, but that's going to be very rare. Can you think of any reason that might not be so rare why I might want to be able to look at this and understand what's happening?
It might help us debug our code.
Say it again.
It might help us debug our code.
Yes. People don't think about this, except Anne, apparently. But even developers don't think about this a lot. But this happens so often when there's a problem and you think, oh, well, I don't know what the problem is. All I know is that something's not showing up. Well, what am I going to do? If you can make your source files easy to understand, it makes it easier to debug. Now, again, this is John Paul's opinion, and there are many, 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 many examples, probably many more examples that aren't easy to understand than there are examples that are easy to understand. So, this is just my opinion, but I saw this so many times that in my mind, just like having good architecture and good design that's easy to understand is important, I think trying to make your data easy to understand is important so that you can debug it. Things will always go wrong. So if you think about a PNG or a JPEG, is that easy to understand? I saw a no and a yes. It's not easy to understand if what?
If you want to look the effective data.
Yes, if you open it in a hex editor, it's not easy to understand at all. But it is easy to understand in the sense of
Photoshop.
yes. And so you could probably make the same argument for a lot of these things, that if you had a good program visualizer, then maybe making the file easy to understand isn't important, and I would probably agree with that. But one other nice thing about having it easy to understand and easy to read, and sometimes it doesn't make sense to do this, but another nice thing is when you put it in source control, you can look at what changed. This was so valuable for me at Avalanche when I could look at materials specifically to see what broke and why. If someone said, oh, this material doesn't look right, I could go to source control, I could see all the changes, and I could do a normal diff program, just like the text diff, and I could see, oh, on this date, this person changed this from that to that. And it was really easy to see. So that's another reason. But again, this is just one way to do it, and many games won't do it. Any questions about that? Okay. I didn't wait for it to see if there were any questions. All right. What kind of data do we need? So we're trying to make, yes?
If you mention about maintainable, why should it?
Oh, right. Maintainable, same thing that I just talked about with debugging. So, I guess source control mentioned is a reason for that. So if we can think about that's actually good. Let's talk about it. But just briefly. Something that happens a lot at Avalanche, and that's the only game studio I've worked at, so I actually don't know how common this is at other places. But we would get in a position where we'd say, oh no, I need to change something. And with some assets, it was so hard that it was basically impossible. There is no way. It's like, well, that would be great if we could change it, but it's impossible. But with assets designed this way, we could. With our materials and shaders and stuff like that. If we decided, oh, you know what? We need to go and, I don't know, I'm just going to make something up. If we decided we had to invert the value for a shader parameter for every material in the game, we could. How could we do it with a file like this? How is it possible to do something like that?
I mean, if you are defining the location, you can just create it and
These are just Lua files, so we could go through every file in the game, open it up and look for that and do something and check it back in. We could write a script to do it, and we actually did this quite a bit. And then it would update gracefully for artists and nobody. We could resolve it in source control too. If anyone had it checked out, we could do a diff on this and make it maintainable. That's not something that we're going to talk about or do in this class, but it's something you can think about when you're actually making data. If you make it easy to read and understand and maintain, if you do ever have to go through and change a thing, like you said, you can, right? Even if that's not the normal way you're going to make it. If you have to go in and change a color or change a vertex, you can, because it's maintainable. Okay? Is that a good quick answer to that? All right. So let's talk about what kind of data we need for a 3D object, for this geometry. Do you remember in your factory function what data you pass in? There should be four things.
The vertex buffer, the vertex data, index data, and like the missing number of
the array of
Yeah.
vertices.
The vertices, the indexes.
There's the array of indices.
And the sizes, yeah.
And there's how many vertices and how many indices.
Yes.
So when you say the sizes, that's two.
Oh,
right?
super, yeah.
So those are the four things you need in order to create the vertex buffer and index buffer and create your geometry. So somehow we need to put those four things in this file. Okay? Like I said, you can make the file format anything you want. We're going to use Lua. So if I want to make, what are we going to start with? Let's start with the vertices. That makes sense, right? Let's start with the vertices. Let's make a triangle. So how many vertices do I want? Okay. How can I do that? What will that look like in Lua? Yes?
There's 3 vectors. You do that, like.
Tell me what to type.
So like a brace for each vector, I don't know.
Like this?
Yeah, then like X, Y, Z. Yeah.
Tell me what to type.
0, 0, 0.
Like that?
Yeah, then like comma. I guess but then like a comma after that brace. Right, it's already dead. Yeah, then another brace. I guess. Yeah, just like one for each. Never mind. This is already.
Another set of braces around those sorts of braces.
Yeah.
You're saying yeah, like should we do that?
Can you specify like a type? Like can you say like float or int in Lua, or does Lua care about it? Or I forget.
Well, that's what we're doing. Does Lua carry? Can you do that? Yeah?
Don't you do like quotes and then like the name of the thing? I think.
Tell me what to type.
I need a minute.
Like vector 3 or something. Yeah.
Okay. Let's keep that up there, but let's take a little break and talk about how you can define tables in Lua. There are basically 2 different ways that a table can work. It can work as an array or as a dictionary. These aren't official Lua terms, it's just kind of how I think of it. An array would be what?
0, 1, 2, 3. 0, 1, 2, 3.
Almost. 1, 2, 3, 4, because Lua is 1 base, but yes. An array would be when you have indices that are integers starting at 1 and they're contiguous. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and so on and so on. And then a dictionary would be,
String. Key as a string.
and actually in Lua it doesn't have to be a string, it can be, does anyone know? It could. What else can it be? Yes, and what else can it be? So in Lua you can actually use anything as a key. So there's 2 different modes that you can have for tables. You can have contiguous integer arrays starting at 1. Contiguous integer indices starting at 1, and that saves it as a contiguous array under the hood. Or you can have any other keys. But the most common are strings, so your first answer was good. And in fact, when you think about the name dictionary, that's what comes to mind, right? We have some kind of string, and that string can be anything and points to anything else. So if we have those 2 kinds of data types in a table in Lua, and we're trying to make some kind of human readable file format, then we use an array when what? Based on what I said. When would you use an array?
When there are continuous data without a name.
Yes. And one more point to that, but everything you just said is right.
When there is something in order.
Yes, when the order matters. If there's data that is ordered, then you use an array. And that means you use a dictionary when the order doesn't matter. And when we say order matters, or order doesn't matter, it's important to talk about what we mean, because that's kind of ambiguous. There is always going to be some kind of order that you list things. And in fact, if you think about a C struct, there's going to be some kind of order. Right? But sometimes it's arbitrary. If it's arbitrary, you can switch it around, then I'd say that order doesn't matter. But if you switch it around and you get something different, then order does matter. If order matters, you should use an array. If order doesn't matter, you should use a... Okay. Let's do some review of syntax. If I want to make an array, I can just start typing stuff. So I just made a table. It has an array of how many? 5 what?
Integers.
Yep, so I just made an array of 5 integers. Here, I've made an array of 2 strings. Okay? So to make an array, you just start listing them out, separated by commas. What this does is say index 1 is a string 1, index 2 is a string 2. Let's do different, let me pick different strings to make a little more sense. I have an array of 3
Strings.
Index 1 is a string.
SDA.
Index 2 is a string. Index 3 is a string.
WER.
Okay. Maybe I did spend too much time talking about vectors, whatever. We'll make it, guys. We'll make this cool. Okay. If I want to make a dictionary, then I can say I don't know how I accidentally got autocomplete. I always try to turn that off, but whatever. Okay. I now have a table that has too many things. How many things in it? 2, and it's a dictionary. The key of what? What's one key?
Some key.
And that's what type?
That's a 2 keys. No, it's but would you like the type of the key, or is it like?
Yes, that's what I'm asking.
Okay, so it's either.
String.
Some key is a string, even though there's not quotes. Lua has some syntactic sugar, it's called. That's how you define
Oh, it's still a string.
a string. And then the value is also a. I could also do this and this. I still have 2 values in this table. Both of the keys are of what type?
Strings.
But the type of the first value, the type of some key, well, that's the wrong way to phrase it. The type of the first value I show is a, and the type of the second one is a. Okay. Someone's coming back from Joe's class, maybe, maybe not. Okay. And you can start combining stuff too. You can say, what did I just do?
Make them arrays.
Dictionary of arrays.
Dictionary of dictionary also. It can generate like dictionary
Yeah,
of arrays.
it's a dictionary of tables.
Oh.
So I could do this. Or I could do this. Whatever. Right? So I now have the asset is a single table. it an array or a dictionary?
Dictionary of tables.
Good, it's a dictionary because it has string keys. The order doesn't matter. And then I have another table, and is this table an array or a dictionary?
Array.
Good. What about this one? So I'm saying the order of these two don't matter, but the order of that does matter, and the order of that does matter. Okay. Back to the original question. So we have 4 pieces of data, right? We have a vertex array and an index array, and then vertex count and the index count. How are we going to do it? What are some options?
2 dictionaries and 2
Tell me what's the type.
string and table.
Wait, say
For
that again.
vertex data, string and table.
You want me to put vertex data?
As key and then a table.
Oh, okay. Like this?
Yeah.
Okay. And what?
Then index data and a table.
With a comma, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then index count equals to integer.
Equals what?
Integer.
Okay. We're going to make a triangle, so 3. Is that good?
Yeah. And then vertex count equals to 3.
Like so? Okay. So you're telling me that you just made a dictionary because you say that the order of these don't matter. Is that true?
Probably no, because vertex count should be before vertex data. If we are reading it,
I just typed what you told me to type. You think vertex count should be before vertex data?
yeah.
Okay.
I don't think it matters because it's a dictionary.
Well, here's the question you all need to ask yourselves. You say it doesn't matter because it's a dictionary, and that's true, but the real question is, should it be a dictionary, right? The real question is, does it matter? And if it does matter, then it shouldn't be a dictionary, it should be in a array. Yes. So you're right that it's a dictionary, and that means order doesn't matter. But the real question is, should order matter? Does order matter? Should vertex count go before vertex data, like you said, or does it not matter?
It matters because
For readability.
Like you probably want to know the size of the array before you decide. I mean, like in terms of like reading it, you're probably going to want to initialize and stuff.
Okay, so this is good. This is why we do it in class, because it confuses people a lot. So you might need it before, but in our priorities for our human readable file, what are they?
easy to read, easy to understand, and easy.
Do we care about whether it's easy to process?
No.
We don't.
Oh, okay,
And in fact, if we think about how to read Fluent, there's all lots of information that we're not going to go over in class, but it actually doesn't matter. You can read these in any order you want. So order doesn't matter. You had a question?
I have a concern.
Okay.
Which is that.
Is it how much time we have left in class? I mean,
No.
it's sorry, I should have. That was rude of me to ask you. You're asking a question. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'll go fast. Which is just that in the case of the dictionary, you care about the names of the keys.
Yes.
Which means that later on when you're building something that can write this, a program that can write this file for you, it has to know the names of the keys that you're looking for, which is maybe slightly concerning, because it's kind of coupled back.
That's true, but that's actually not a concern. But that's absolutely true. Any file format you make, you have to make assumptions. You have to say, this is the file, and who's ever reading it needs to know how to read the file. If you like XML, I hate XML because it's the worst thing ever invented. I'm not kidding. we don't have time to talk about it, I'm exaggerating a little bit. But XML, they kind of have the schema where they try to, do something like that, but in games, we don't care. Right? So it is a very good concern, but that's part of reading in files. No matter what you do here, you're going to write files, and then you're going to have code that know how to read the files. So does that make sense? Yeah.
So for readability, maybe we should just take the counts out. So like, what if like the person like says, oh, I forgot a vertex, and they add like a vertex, then there's like a billion of them, and they forget how many there are, and they don't want to be able to count them all. So maybe we should leave the counting to like the processor and not the reader, right?
I love it, and I completely agree. Did everybody hear that? People, the assignment talks about this a little bit, but people will try to put the counts in because you need it to create the file. But what you're saying is, can we derive it? You need to list them explicitly, and you don't, because Lua, you can actually get the count from these cases. But let's go back to the original question about whether it's a dictionary or an array, whether order matters. And we had a lot of different opinions. But here's the question you need to ask yourself. And this isn't obvious, but I hope when I do this, it will become more obvious. This is a dictionary. I forgot who said it, but it's a dictionary until we've labeled it, so we know what each of these are, right? If it's an array, that means order matters, and it also means they're not labeled. And this is what an array would look like. Right? Do you see what I did? That is how to make, instead of a dictionary, that's how you make an array. Is that good? It's terrible. Why?
Not easy to readable, not easy to read.
Good. So when we say order matters, that's why we do these exercises. The order doesn't really matter. There's no reason if you see 4 things that you'll say, oh, the first one is vertex count, and then it's vertex data, and then it's index data, and it's index count. Right? There's no way you should reasonably be expected to know that. Because the order of those 4 things doesn't matter. So, does that give another way to think about it? It's not that the order matters in terms of parsing or processing, because we can do that any way we want. It's when reading and understanding. Is there an implicit order that people would understand? And in this case, no, there isn't. So we definitely want to make a dictionary. Okay?
Question.
Yes?
How do you do that kind of selection?
Oh, I didn't know that until recently either. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Alt key. A bunch of programs will do that. Notepad++ will let you do it too. Look, it's so amazing. There's other cool things you can do. Now I'm on the spot though, but like you can just start typing in. I know, right? I'm glad you learned one useful thing today. I felt the same way, and I always forget it.
But it's only writable if it is continuous. You can't select. Can you select 2 different parts? And
I don't know. If only when we're trying time we do some experimenting. Okay. I'm going to leave the rest up to you. This is a good start. What you said about index count and vertex count, Aresh, is exactly right. You probably get rid of those. So your final thing will look something like this. It doesn't have to be vertex data and index data. That's just an example. You do whatever you think is good. And then there will be something in here. There will be, in our case of a triangle for vertex data, there's going to be what comes next that we don't have.
array.
Who said that? Why? An array because
It matters.
order matters. Now this is another thing which is a little confusing. The order doesn't really matter because the vertices can go in any order that you want, but it matters in the sense of you have to pick an order. right? Like, you have to have an order. An order, what order you pick does matter because then the indices use that order. So, exactly right. Next will come an array, and then after that, you'll have to figure out what goes next. And then vertex or index data, what will come next?
Array of indexes.
Possibly, or maybe an array of other things, but some kind of an array for the same reason. Okay? So the rest you can figure out. This is how you'll make a human readable file. Okay? Any questions? Yes?
I'm thinking whether having the index count will make this more readable.
That's a good question, and if I wasn't running out of time, we discuss it. But you think about it, and the assignment does talk about that a little bit. It will make it more readable, but it will make it less maintainable. So the question you have to ask yourself is there a way you could make it readable like that, but still make it maintainable? And there is a way that you can do it with Lua. That's another nice thing about using Lua rather than your own file format. So you think about that and see if you can figure it out. Again, remembering that we'll have a program that will make this automatic. That's all I'm going to say, but excellent point. You can put something like that in your exporter when we get that far. Any other questions? Okay. So there's a big bunch of examples about how to use Lua. There's a Using Lua example page, and just like, oh no, just like your old friend in assignment 1, remember all the reading and pages in assignment 1 and then you thought that was done? Well, there's more. Okay, it doesn't matter, we don't have to see it. But there's a solution and lots of examples. This used to be a lot more critical before Joe covered it. But what I find is most people think they know Lua, but then when we actually do stuff like this, you've kind of forgotten some. So my recommendation is not a requirement. My recommendation would be to go through all these examples. It's okay if you go quickly, but it's probably a good refresher and stuff you can learn. But there's a lot of material here because I made it before Joe did as much. So it's probably more than you need, so it might be boring, but you can decide. But just so you know, a lot of times when people don't go through this, they get stuck on the assignment and I'll be like, oh, your answer was in there, so I don't know. Okay, so I'm not going to really talk about how to actually use Lua. I've written a book. There's tons and tons of reading material and examples. Okay. So what you'll have to do is at runtime, after you've made this file format and you've done the build part, which we haven't talked about, but we will soon, you'll load the file in, and using the stuff that we've learned in this Using Lua examples, you'll load it in and extract the 4 pieces of data. Right? Your vertex array, how many vertices there are, your index array, and how many indices there are, and then you pass that on to your create function just like you did before. Does that make sense? Does that seem like something you all can do? Any questions, any worries, concerns about that? Okay. One thing though, when we do this load file, that I'm going to require you to do is to start using a system that you've had since assignment 1 but we haven't used, which is this sort of asset handles and asset manager. You've had to kind of look at it already when you've used shaders. I don't know how closely you've looked at that or if any of you have stepped through it, but we have these shaders and their actual handles. Have you looked at that? And then you use kind of the shader manager to interact with them. So we're going to do the same thing. So you have your representation of a 3D object. Right now it's reference counted. You've used the reference counting stuff that I've given you, and part of the reason I made you do that is for this next step so you can use this manager that I'm going to give you. So you'll convert whatever representation you have so that it has this kind of templated manager, and then you can use some kind of handles to your 3D object. Okay? Does anyone know what a handle is when I say that? Not necessarily in my class, the stuff I've given you, but just in general when I say a handle.
Object that manages the, like another object which manages something.
So I wouldn't say manages, but otherwise I would say yes, it's some kind of thing that represents another thing. A pointer is a handle that's supported natively by the language, right? If you have a pointer, you say, oh, this is just some number, but I can use it to gain access to an object that it represents. And I do that because I have syntax for saying, oh, pretend that this address represented by this number is an actual thing. So a handle is a generalization of that idea. You say, I'm not going to give you the actual object, but I'm going to give you some kind of token that represents the object. And then if you want to do something with the object, you come back to me and you say, hey, I want the thing represented by this to do something. I'm like, okay, no problem.
So what's the advantage of using handle?
What's the advantage of using a handle?
Encapsulation.
That may be true, but we care about performance. So indirection is always going to have some kind of performance penalty. Can anyone think of any other advantage that there might be? It's related to what we're doing in this assignment. There's a reason we're making the change in this assignment. And we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I didn't mention handles. The very first of class, I was talking about when we're loading stuff. Anyone remember?
So like event handlers, you don't know when they're actually gonna finish what you call. And so that's why handlers are good for keeping a reference to an object that you correctly.
Good idea, but not quite. We're out of time, so I'm just going to say it and not explain it very well, but it's something to think about. The reason we use it in this class, the reason we're using handles, is so that we can load things and have it be referenced. So the manager is going to kind of keep track of, has this thing been loaded before? And then it will say, oh, okay, here's the handle to it, and that handle is kind of your file handle. It's a way of saying, I asked for something unique, in this case unique because of the file path, and I'm going to get back something that represents that unique file path. And then once I have that, I just hold on to it, and I use it as much as I want, and then when I'm done, I say, okay, I'm done with it. But there may be other things that also have handles out there. So it's another kind of reference method. I know that wasn't a very good explanation. Maybe it's good enough to think about. You're nodding. You're kind. but that's why. When I first started teaching this class, I didn't do this, and then people would always ask, well, isn't this, if I keep loading it, I'm loading the same file over and over. I thought that's a good point. So one year I added this, and I don't know, now nobody asks that anymore, but people get confused about there's a lot of examples like this, right, where I say, I could do this, but then it's more complicated, and sometimes I don't know if I made the right choice or not. But that's what it's for. It's a way of doing reference counting, so you can just keep loading the same thing, but it only loads one. It's kind of another reference counting. Okay? Any other questions? So we're going to add this, and then you'll create a function that looks like this. It calls load, and it passes in a string reference to the path you want to load, your objects, your geometry, and then it's like a factory function that will return that. And if you do that, if you implement that, then this asset manager thing will be able to handle it correctly. No pun intended. Okay? And then the only thing that's left is to work on the build system and to make this geometry builder. Eventually, what the geometry builder is going to do is really exciting. It's one of my favorite assignments when we make these binary files. But for assignment 6, it couldn't be more boring. The only thing it does is it says, what's my target path and what's my destination path? Copy or what's my source path? What's my target path? Copy the source path to the target path. That's the only thing it does, is it just copies it, because we're not going to build it yet. But we're going to put this mechanism in place so that we can build it. So I think the assignment tells enough. In fact, yeah, I think the assignment has enough to explain how to do this. But you will create a new project, and this is going to be a tools project, something we haven't done before. So it's going to be like the shader builder, but something you've created. And you're going to learn a little bit more how our system works. You'll make this new project, you'll inherit from a virtual class, and then you'll implement the build function. And that build function will copy the source path to the target path. And then you'll add a few more Lua things that explains how, and then just like you can add new shaders, once all this stuff is in place, you can add your mesh files in there, and then they'll get built. And then when you run the game, you can see it. Okay? So, right now, here's my game from last time. Pretty boring, but you see I have the square and triangle, right? I don't want to show you my mesh file on camera because that would give away part of what I want you to do for the assignment. Where did it go? Maybe I closed it. But I'm going to open this up and change one of the vertices, and then hide it again. Okay. So I just opened up. I have something called square.geometry. You can pick any little star. So it's human readable, and I went in and I changed one of the vertices. And all I have to do now is push build the solution, and you can see that it actually built my thing. It detected that there was a difference, and all my dependencies worked, and it built it. And if all went well, then if I run the game, even though the code didn't change, then I now have, instead of a square, it shows that the vertex I changed is different. So pretty cool, huh? I mean, maybe it doesn't seem cool, but it is cool. When you get it, I think you'll see this is cool. You can change anything you want and run it without having to recompile. You just change, and your build dependencies will automatically figure it out whenever it's different. I'll build it to the right place, and you run it. And I could have double-clicked this too, right? It's all in that game install directory. Ready to go. Okay? So that's assignment. Any questions about anything? Yeah?
It's also like if we only change the code, but we didn't change the data, do we need to recompile our data?
That's a great question. The way that the dependencies work is it should all happen automatically. So if the only code I change is game code, then let's do it. I don't want to actually show you the changes, but I can kind of show you the results after the fact. Okay. So here in mygame.cpp, I made a little white space change. I put space and then delete. So when I build a solution, my game should build again. But is there any reason to build the mesh files again? There isn't, because the only thing I've changed is my game, right? The code. So if I push build solution and all goes well and I don't have any bugs, then good, my game built, but nothing else changed right? Nothing else happened. Can you tell? I don't know if you've read this stuff. I mean, do you believe what I just said, that nothing else changed? Okay. But now, and if I build a solution now, nothing happens. But now look what happens if I actually go in to my geometry builder. And make a change. Oh, I did that intentionally.
Oh.
I don't want you to see my geometry builder. Okay, so again, my geometry builder, there's a little star. I made a little white space change. So what should happen now is, dependency-wise, what should get built first? This is your test of all the stuff we talked about the first few weeks. The shaders shouldn't change. You say, yeah. Shaders shouldn't change. What should get built first? Geometry builder, perfect. Geometry builder should get changed because I changed it. And then what should happen next? And it should build the geometry again. This is kind of what you were asking about. I don't know if it's exactly what you're asking about, but since the geometry builder changed, we need to rebuild the geometry in case they're different. Now, in our case, all it's doing is copying, so we know it won't be different. But when it gets to binary files, it might be, right? So what we should see when I build this is geometry builder should build first, and then my two geometry files should both build, but the game code shouldn't build, right? So let's see if that works. Good, geometry builder got built first. Hopefully if my dependencies worked right, who knows if they did, but at least we didn't get any errors, so that seemed to work. Oh no. Oh no, it didn't work. Well, I was so excited to show this. Why did my geometry file still? Well,
Maybe because there are not any changes detected by the system.
Seems like
no. This is a bug in my code. Well, I guess I'll have to look at that and send an update. What should have happened is after Geometry Builder finished, then these should have started. That means I didn't set up my dependencies correctly. But even so, that's what happened. Oh, there's a bug in my stuff. But at least it's not a bug in anything I gave you. It's I messed up. Okay. Here we go. Let me fix it. How embarrassing. Okay. Okay. All right. Here we go. Let's try it again. Okay, so everything's back to its normal state. If I build the solution, nothing happens. And then if I go to geometry filter, I'm glad you asked this question. I'm sorry you guys had to see my mistakes. Let's hope it works now. Hooray, it works, okay. So your code should do the same thing, so don't make the same mistake I did. So this is what it was supposed to do. So it built Geometry Builder, and then when it was finished, then it tried to build the assets, and it said, oh, it's changed, so now we need to build everything. Thanks for catching my bug. Does that make sense? That you don't know what I did or why I changed that? But it's good that we talked about this and you can see what it's supposed to do. I bet when you think about it, plus read the assignment that I didn't read, obviously carefully enough, you'll get it. Okay? Does that make sense how it works? So, one of the reasons I put so much emphasis on trusting dependencies is for stuff just like this. You want to always make sure that you can just build and know that you have something correct. But you don't build more than you have to, and then you can. So, great question. Sorry, there was a little bit of a rough spot there because of my bug. Anything else? Yes?
Is this data-driven stuff also apply to serialization? Something like, do they need to have a user readable file for serialization?
I don't know exactly. No.
I mean, the serialization should be some kind of intermediate stage, so they can comment on the distributed, so the user shouldn't be.
That I think is more like a binary file.
Okay.
So that is probably going to be more what we talked about in assignment 8. Any other questions about anything? Okay. So assignment 5 is due tomorrow, 9. This will be due next week. The next assignment will be assignment 7. That's the fun one, it's Maya. And then we have fall break. So assignment 7 won't be due until 2 weeks from then. So it's not like a lot, it's actually a short assignment anyway, but like I told you, the whole week is off, it's not like a 2-week assignment, so if you're getting tired, that's good, we're getting the fall break, take a rest. Then we have 2 more assignments after that, we have assignment 8 and 9. By then, October is done, and then we have our project, so you should starting to think about what you want to do for your system project, and that will be about 3 weeks, roughly, and then you'll present, and then you'll do your final project where you make a game, where you use your project plus at least one other person in the class's project. That's harder to think about, but I mean, maybe be thinking about a simple kind of arcade-ish, really simple game you'd like to do. Maybe if it uses your system project, that's good, but it's time to probably start thinking about what would be cool to do. Do I want to do audio and try to make a good interface? Do I want to do physics? Do I want to do controller, gameplay? Do I want to do AI? Right? So be thinking about that, but we're actually a good way into the semester. The standard assignments are getting pretty close to being done. So, okay. Thank you, everyone.